Well, another day, another announcement. The Prime Minister is today committing billions towards the submarine service and Trident programme, the latest in a string of media events this week. He's certainly showing a willingness to tackle issues that have defeated other governments recently, whether that's devolution, rebuilding the armed forces, taking the care burden off the NHS, or tackling the benefits bill for youngsters out of work. And that does take political imagination and courage. But we're only in week 2 of the Burnham era, and we're already seeing the difference between vibes and delivery. Launching number 10 North, or some harsh words about FIFA's plans for World Cup football, are easy wins. Finding £18 billion for social care, or indeed a similar sum for the armed forces, now that's quite a bit harder. And given he wants to stick to Labour's manifesto commitments on income tax and the so-called triple lock guarantee on pensions, his financial room for manoeuvre is distinctly limited. So things are already looking a bit sketchy. The PM is not ready to commit to levels of spending on the military that John Healey said were essential when he resigned as Defence Secretary last month. And now that he's Chancellor, Mr Healey has to find the money for. And social care? Well, Burnham was candid enough yesterday to admit that this issue has beaten him before as a minister and that he'll need cross-party support to crack it this time. And even when the governments get the money, they have the planning process to bear. Nuclear power stations or airport runways that take decades, reservoirs unbuilt despite climate change. One starts to get the uneasy feeling that aspects of government are unreformable. And that's not just about money. Whether it's health, education or defence, there are simply so many stakeholders defending their own interests, from unions or associations to corporates. Not to mention the issue of backbenchers who have discovered the power of being awkward. From Boris Johnson to Keir Starmer, we've seen that even big parliamentary majorities aren't enough to power through a Prime Minister's agenda. When the fringes of the party don't want to play ball, things get even harder. Is the Prime Ministership of Mr Burnham going to be any different? This is the Times at 1 on Times Radio with Mark Urban. Well, let's start off on the subject of those awkward backbenchers. Here's Defence Secretary Wes Streeting speaking to Times Radio Breakfast this morning and defending the character of his colleagues.
There's been a narrative that's built that the Parliamentary Labour Party is full of people who are incapable of making choices and trade-offs, and that's just not true. We've got a really strong group of Labour MPs who, when they were scrutinising previous attempts at welfare reform, were concerned, not because they were opposed to welfare reform, but because the case didn't stack up. And they were concerned about the detail and the implementation of those reforms, not the principle.
But are he and his boss about to butt up against the cold, hard reality of trying to deliver their big promises? Well, Ben Clatworthy is Whitehall editor for The Times, and he joins me now. Ben, welcome aboard.
Good afternoon.
One of the things that I've been thinking about this morning, Ben, is whether Burnham's choice not to go for an early election, which might have allowed him to revisit those manifesto commitments on no new taxes and not abandoning the pensions triple lock, will prove to have been a defining choice, because it kind of locks him in so much, doesn't it, on the public finances?
Yes, I mean, his commitment to standing by both the fiscal rules. He says that he's going to look for wiggle room within the fiscal rules, but has basically, by and large, said that he will stand by them, plus his commitment to standing by the 2024 manifesto does mean he's rather hemmed in. And then you throw in the fact that you have a Chancellor who resigned over defence spending. You would feel that some agreement will have been made there in order for him to take the job of Chancellor. It's also interesting, it's worth remembering that in John Healey's resignation letter, he complained of Treasury trickery around defence spending. And actually, what we've seen in the last 2 weeks since Andy Burnham came to power last Monday is that a lot of the announcements he's making rely very heavily on Treasury trickery in order to fund what he wants to do.
I mean, John Healey's position is uniquely awkward, isn't it? I mean, in the resignation letter, he talked about an increase. I mean, people keep using this figure, this proportion of the economy, GDP, of 2.68%, which was equivalent to, I think, 13.5 billion more on defence, and said that just wouldn't cut it. And then when Dan Jarvis replaced him for a short amount of time, that went from 2.68 to 2.7. I mean, that's the kind of margins we're talking about. And even then it emerged that over 4 billion of that, they didn't know where the money was coming from. I mean, John Healey now inherits this whole thing, doesn't he?
He does, and he's going to be walking that fiscal tightrope that Rachel Reeves was walking for the last 2 years. He's also going to have the same Treasury officials who were advising Rachel Reeves, now advising him. And yes, we all know that the Treasury is very capable of moving the odd billion here and there, using a little bit of spreadsheet trickery to move money around. But the values that we're talking about here are massive, and those savings will either have to come from departments or through tax rises, both of which are unpopular spending cuts with government departments, officials, but also people who see public services declining. Tax rises, very unpopular, and many of them ruled out. So you end up looking for more trickery in terms of how to raise tax that doesn't breach the commitments made in the manifesto.
Yeah, well, let's look at that tax point, because on the social care package, I mean, people are talking about between 16 and 18 billion a year extra that has to be found. And of course, there he was yesterday saying he needs cross-party support for that. And the Conservatives more or less instantly saying, well, you haven't got our support to raise new taxes. Is this issue of new taxes to fund some of these things going to become a defining one, do you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, everything comes down to money, and the tax burden is already at a record high. Further putting strain on household finances would be deeply unpopular. But at the same time, the Prime Minister is making big commitments, big financial commitments that he's talking about. Social care reform, very expensive, as you say, but also measures that he wants for cost of living are very expensive, things that have been tried before that have been discounted or even rejected as policy ideas because they are too expensive. And we already knew before all of this happened, people were talking about Rachel Reeves having a difficult budget in the autumn that she had to deliver. Nothing has changed in terms of the values on the spreadsheets. And in fact, you see today that the Bank of England holding the interest rates because of the fallout of the US war in Iran. Nothing is helping the government. There's no silver lining in terms of what you would get back from the OBR in terms of the budget this autumn. So it's going to be very painful for John Healey. And what we are seeing in a Prime Minister is that he loves delivering good news. He's very happy, very comfortable telling people that he's cut £1 off their bus fare, or that he's reducing VAT on electricity. Those are easy, pleasing announcements to make. But actually, some of this bigger stuff, for example, welfare reform, social care reform, is going to come with a huge bill. And that will be very difficult for John Healey, but also very difficult for the Prime Minister if suddenly he has to change his tune and say, well, actually, you are going to have to pay more for this.
Well, he's going to rely on the support of the Parliamentary Labour Party, or have to, isn't he, and garner it somehow and rally it in ways that Keir Starmer seemed unable to do, you know, when they balked at welfare reform at even quite a modest scale last year. So the question is, do you think Andy Burnham will be more successful at managing the Parliamentary Labour Party? And is there a chance that the Starmerites become a source of difficulty for him?
Well, yes. The answer to both of those questions is undeniably yes. Will he be better at taking people with him? Yes, definitely. He is a much more natural communicator. He is a more comfortable around backbench MPs, and also they feel that there is a bounce from him, that there's that good feeling at the moment. But on the other side, there's also 11 loyalists to Starmer, who was sacked in the initial reshuffle. Their allies, their friends are bitter as well. There was also a huge number of changes in junior ministerial roles and also private secretaries as well. So there's more disgruntled people in the party. And actually some of the venom from Starmerites this week has been quite interesting, that they are they are already saying that they're unhappy, already pointing out flaws in Burnham's plans. No one more. The biggest one that we saw was obviously Darren Jones immediately saying that the energy announcement was that was going to use the money from the digital ID scheme was unfunded. That was a big intervention, swiping from the sideline. So I think both of those points are definitely true in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Ben Clatworthy, Whitehall editor of The Times, for joining us and laying all that out.